You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fika. With our guest today, author and druid Luke Eastwood, and me, your host, Vicky Bennison. Luke has been training as a druid for over 30 years. He has written over 10 books, as well as for magazines and websites, founding the Pagan Ireland magazine, which he also edits. He's done many jobs. Ooh, just a second. Sorry about that. Tech thing's called. Okay. He has had many jobs over the years, and he studied horticulture in Dublin at Dublin's School of Horticulture. And I have a feeling that is a subject that is close to his heart because he's also written a druid gardening book. He's organized festivals, green activist groups, and definitely gets right to the point. So I'm going to do that with this show. Our focus books are A Path Through the Forest, his most recent, a collection of Druidry essays and interviews, and also Samhain, The Roots of Halloween. Thank you, Luke, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us and shine a light on some of these customs we've grown up with, and taking it one topic at a time because there's so much information in A Path Through the Forest. That's the only way I can figure out how to do it.
Okay.
Welcome to Fika.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Vicky. It's a pleasure to be here. So I hope I can answer your questions in a way that people will understand and appreciate. I'll do my best anyhow.
I will do my best to make the questions small enough that you have a chance to answer them. First, for what drew you've been studying this for over 30 years. What drew you to being a druid in the first place? What do you think it had to offer you?
Yeah, this is a question I'm often asked, and I guess ultimately it was a dissatisfaction with, my religious upbringing because uh, it was very confusing for me. Partly because I was sent to Catholic school, but at the same time, my mother was an atheist, and my dad kind of sort of was leaning that way too. So there was this like go to mass, but don't listen to anything the priest says, kind of thing.
So it's complicated.
That was it, complicated, and then um, I was also introduced to Buddhism by my uncle when I was about 15, and that didn't go down particularly well with the folks. So, because it just seemed a bit weird and, a bit out there to them, I guess. Although, I mean, I would have thought they wouldn't have been that surprised. But, like, I suppose I was only 15. My dad was a big fan of the Beatles, and they went off to India and, studied Indian mysticism and all that kind of thing. Although, I don't think he'd have had much interest in that, or my mother, really. Although it was my mother that introduced me to yoga, which I still have an interest in. So, anyway, I kind of realized that maybe Buddhism was more the direction I wanted to go, but I didn't know anybody who was interested in Buddhism apart from my uncle. And so as I got older, I went to university and I looked into various different things, including sort of Celtic mythology. I studied sort of Kabbalah, well, really the religious aspects rather than the magical aspects of Kabbalah, about what that actually means in terms of what you call metaphysics or cosmology. I found that very fascinating. Although I decided that wasn't where I wanted to go particularly, I found it very interesting. So I suppose what really swung it is I've always had an interest in nature since I was a kid. Although, I mean, when I was a kid, I had a piece of garden for vegetables, but I neglected it terribly. I would go off and play in the woods or go and play soccer or something. and forget to water my vegetables or weed them. And eventually, my dad took it back off me because it was kind of a disaster. But the point is, though, that I was used to the countryside and the woods, and I understood sort of from osmosis really how the plants grew, and if you looked after them, they would grow and they provide you with things like food and medicine, etc. Um, well, not that most people use herbs and plants for medicine these days, but that's the basis of modern medicine is extracts from plants mostly. Um, but anyway, so this went on, and I discovered that actually druids do exist today. Something I thought was actually in the past only at the time, and then I fitted with my kind of environmental ethos and my love of nature, and the sort of a less dogmatic approach towards faith and belief. So it's suited me very well, I think. So that's kind of how I ended up going in that direction.
So you searched until you found something that fit who you were instead of trying to fit into something that had
Yeah,
rules and
yeah. Well, I'll tell you a funny story, really. I remember at school there was this vocation week, and they showed us this film about St. Francis called Brother Sun, Sister Moon, and I think it was the Paul Clare's order, anyway, that sort of was associated with him as well. So, that was a really well done film. It's a European film about his life, and of course he was very rich, and he gave it all up, and he rebuilt this church and went around in, rags and went off to Rome. Um, I thought, wow, this guy really gets it, what the message of Christianity is and was, and I thought that's really inspiring. And the point of this was to get you interested in becoming a priest or a monk or whatever. But of course, then there's a mention of that celibacy, and you can't have a girlfriend, you can't get married, or whatever, or have a boyfriend either, for that matter. But and immediately my heart sank, and I thought, oh that sucks. Because I was interested in girls, and there was no way I was going to give up the possibility of having a girlfriend, so to pursue like the spiritual life within the church. But I didn't really realize that, of course, Protestants don't have that requirement, and neither does the Eastern Orthodox Church. Greek, Russian, Armenian Orthodox priests can have a family. But, being within the confines of Catholicism, that's a no-no, although that was about 1,000 years ago that they got rid of that. Before that, you could get married. So it's kind of, I suppose that's a big stumbling block for a lot of people that may be from that kind of background that are interested in the religious life. This whole celibacy thing, which just seems utterly ridiculous to me.
but it moved you into a different direction and you decided to
Mm.
become a druid instead. And
Yeah,
then
and
you
there's
seem
no
very
rules
happy there.
about any of that. To be honest, I mean, there's a lot of hang-ups particularly in Catholicism, regard to sexuality, and that doesn't really seem to be even much of a thing at all in the Druid movement. You know, it's sort of whatever floats your boat, kind of. I suppose
It's
there are moral issues, but they're not particularly linked to you know whether you're married or not married or who you want to like have a relationship with.
No, it's very open to those. It's not as controlling. It's not as dogma oriented. It's not, which we're on the Halloween show, because if you come back and we do the Druid show, and you talk about it becoming a religion, what needs to be done. My question at that time, because we don't know time is going to be, but
Yeah.
why does it have
So
to
we're on
be a
question
religion?
one still. Better go a bit faster, I suppose.
I know. We'll just let them stay wild. Okay, Robin says, "Good morning, Vicky and Luke, and been looking forward to this episode all week." Thank you,
No,
Robin, and
that's
thanks
great.
for listening.
Yeah, thank you
And I
very
hope we
much.
don't disappoint. The whole week's a long time to wait.
Mm.
So You know what? I'm going to skip to Halloween because we're talking a lot this Halloween.
Yeah.
So, okay, I like the way you set up, Salin, the roots of Halloween, because it's very circular. I like structure in the books. Like you start with you um lighting a fire on this first time I'm going to try this in public, Clockta.
Yeah, that's it. Well done. Yeah.
Applaud everybody. They yell at Clockta. And then it goes through all the years from Clockta's origins back to you lighting the torch again to take to Terra. So I don't know how to do this. 2-minute flash attack. How it's Clockta is so important to Samhain, but it's such a big story. So
Yeah. Well, I can try and sort of give you a sort of potted explanation
please
of
do.
why it is important, right? Well, we all know about Halloween, and we know that people have ceremonies in the past, and they now have a celebration run ceremony mostly, but people can see it came from somewhere, and they even today this of having a fire is still a big thing around Halloween. Um, so where does if you want to go back in time, it's there's sort of a history that you can follow, and then it goes back so far, and then it starts to sort of disappear. You've got really the only real place that you can trace this back to, um, specifically related to Halloween or Samhain as it was once called, um, is the Hill of Ward, which used to be called Clockta before it was changed. It was changed because this family called the Wards bought the place, and so it became called the Hill of Ward. That was, I think, in the 1700s or so. But before that, it was known as Clockta, and that's just not some kind of weird coincidence. That is the name of an ancient goddess in Ireland, and the place was named specifically after her. And there's lots of stories about her and her father, a druid called Mugri, or actually more of a god himself. Their real origins are as ancient gods, but it's the stories got all mixed up and conflated, and then there's a lot of involvement with the church to try and kind of ruin the good name of these people, and they've linked this Mugri with someone called Simon Magus and the beheading of John the Baptist and all this kind of crazy stuff. But as I mentioned in the book, the time frame is completely and utterly wrong. So there's no way that either Clocta or Mulgrew could have been around when Jesus was born, because they come from a time that's gone way back centuries and centuries before that, possibly a couple of thousand years before that. So, I mean, the actual origins of Clocta from what they've done in terms of excavating the place, it can be traced back, I think it's something like 3,500 years. So it's the oldest known place in the world that is linked to Halloween as it is, or, of course, other countries have similar festivals, but it wasn't called Halloween, and it wasn't called Samhain before. So that name Halloween's been exported from Ireland, really, and the UK, because Halloween means
All
All
Hallows.
Hallows Eve is what it's a contraction of that. It's a bit of a mouthful saying Happy All Hallows Eve, So you just call it Halloween, So that's kind of that's a like a whistle
Yeah,
stop
no,
sort
you
of
have to.
explanation.
I suggest getting the book because it is very fascinating and there's tidbits that you learn about other things besides Samhain and Halloween as you go through this. There's maps, there's a description of what they found in all the trenches when they
Yeah.
excavated it as as Luke said. It's just a whole lot of information, but very fascinating.
Yeah. Let me just
And
stop you for a minute and I've seen the question there about
let's get
that
to
this
that
actually
one.
relates to find bodies and stuff you mentioned. There was like an infant found in the center of the excavations, but that's actually not really early. I think come from a bit later. But this child, this infant, doesn't appear to have been sacrificed. If you go back into ancient Irish history, you'll find that there were sacrifices, yeah, but not particularly linked with Halloween. They would have been linked with the agrarian or agricultural cycle, and you'll find it not just in Ireland. You'll find that all over the world. I mean, the
All
ancient
the
Greeks,
kids were
the
doing
ancient
it.
Romans, the early Jewish people, um, the Canaanites, gosh, even like in Asia and Africa and Arabia and the Americas, people were sacrificing humans to placate the gods. In fact, if you in the Americas, up until the arrival of Spanish, the Aztecs were doing this. They were sacrificing vast numbers of people to placate the sun god. So, I mean, when you look at examples of this, there are bog burials in Ireland. You can go to Dublin, I think it's the archaeology museum there, and you can see these people who've been ritually slaughtered, and their remains that were thrown into a bog. But the interesting thing about them is they don't appear to have had a violent struggle. Uh, Many people believe that they actually volunteered for this, in the same way that the Norse people volunteered to be sacrificed to the gods, thinking it was an honor rather than something to be terrified of. They actually thought, oh, I'm going to go to Valhalla or whatever, or I'm going to go off to the other world and, you know, um, have a great time hanging out with my ancestors and, be favored by the gods for having made sacrificed myself for the good of my community. So it was a different understanding. It's not like something that's sort of, a satanic sacrifice of, these horrible things that people do have done in the past. Um, it's completely and utterly different, the reasons behind it and the way in which it's done. It will be when somebody sort of put themselves forward for this. It's that what's going on in their head is not terror and fear that they're going to be slaughtered by some evil priest or something. It's a different way of looking at life and the world, I guess.
Well,
That's
really, when we look at the timing of the year, this was like one of the big festivals before weather turned bad. You didn't
mm,
even know if you were going to make it through. And if you could do something to help your loved ones make it through, um, you were going to go for it.
yeah. I mean, there would probably be. You could say that it's quite likely that sacrifices may have happened at this time of year, but you can't tell from these bog burials and such like when it was done. You can roughly guess how long ago, how many years ago, but you would no way of knowing what time of year it was, really.
Well,
I
that's
mean,
the
unless
whole.
you were something very specific, like finding, like, say blackberries in somebody's stomach still, you know that, and they hadn't been digested, you know that they must have been killed in the autumn time, for instance. But that's really super specific. So the chance of you finding something like that are kind of slim, really.
And which is why we weren't there. So any of this book involves archaeological digs. It involves using myths and records from people who have gone before. There's all kinds of references in the back. And, Luke is pretty picky. He now wants to find like berries in people's stomachs. So he's not going to say it if he doesn't think it's real. That it truly happened. So, yes, that is all completely fascinating. I'm going to pull one other thing out of that. Thanks for the question, Robin. I'm going to pull one other thing about that because it was something. Okay. So I had read or heard or something at some place. I don't know. I can't point fingers except at myself that the Druids did not keep a written history. But I always assumed this was because, they were constantly getting attacked by people. They had very special knowledge. You don't want to just get out to anyone. I just thought they had really good memories and didn't want that kind of stuff laying around. And it was a wise thing to do. But then I read the book and was there a feeling that that it was a failing that they didn't write it down or that they didn't have a language before that?
Well, you you're kind of half right, in that not everything would be written down, and they did certainly have amazing powers of recall in terms of memorization. Yeah, I mean, there are books which refer to the ancient records. There's a particular one I spent a long time studying. It's like I think, early Victorian book, The Manners and Customs of the Ancient Irish, and there it gives a list of all the things that the ancient bards had to learn, such as 350 poems off by heart, and all these genealogies and all this kind of stuff. So there was a requirement to learn a huge amount of information and keep it in your head. But this idea that the Druids couldn't write or didn't want to write, that's absolute nonsense. I think that's something that's been used to try and discredit pagans as ignorant, that the pagans, before Christianity were illiterate, and then Christianity civilized the world and brought literature and alphabets and writing to all these savages. That
Well,
is a complete lie, because you've got uh, up to certainly 6,000 years ago or more, you've got alphabets, and we know that there was an alphabet in Ireland which is called Ogham. The official
I
view
gotta
that,
say.
sorry, go on. Did you want to say something?
Oh no, I just said I have a set.
Oh, you have a
Have-
set. Oh, a set of Ogham. Yeah. Well, the origins of that are disputed. Some people would say it's about 400, AD or CE. Whereas I think if you look at the ancient mythology, it refers to the Ogham in clearly very pagan stories going back, 1,000+ years before Christ was alive, before Jesus was alive. So, one of the origin stories is where it gets his name. Ogma is this pagan god associated with the Tuatha, which is like 2000 BCE, so ish. So apparently he invented Ogham. So somebody's wrong, and I'd be inclined to think the conservative estimate coming from the Office of Public Works and such I think that is probably wrong, because much of this is written on stone, and without organic material, you cannot date stone. You can't. You've no idea when it's done, unless it states, "Oh, in the year of our Lord, blah blah," or whatever. Some reference to a known anchor point in the sort of chronology. It could be any age. There's no way of telling. So, the conservative view is uh, that before Christianity, the Irish didn't really use letters or writing very much, but clearly they did, because Cormac MacArt actually gave an order for all of the knowledge of Ireland to be written down into books, and we know that a few hundred years after that, when St. Patrick came to Ireland, I think it's something like 400 or 450 books that he had burned. So where did all these books come from if they didn't exist? If the Irish were illiterate, how the hell did they manage to have books? And it's well known that the Druids in Europe and in Britain, and I assume also in Ireland, could speak ancient Greek. And, they were in like an elite class. So if some guy rocked up from France or from Rome or from Greece, what would was it what they call it, lingua franca, I think that's the right term. The common language was ancient Greek at the time, and then eventually it became Latin. Of course, they spoke Greek. They were very educated people that spent somewhere between like 12 and 20 years training to be a druid. You know, I think it's just propaganda. This whole idea that everything was done orally and they didn't have the skill or the knowledge or the understanding of written languages to actually use them in any real sense.
Well, they dealt with there's a lot of propaganda. So it's but as far as I'm not gonna say I'll get myself in trouble. Okay, this week in Poland with the Halloween. What do Druids think about death? I know most religions have a different view of it.
Yeah, well, that's a very difficult question to answer because one druid will say one thing and another will say something else. But I would say as a general rule, the pagan and particularly Irish pagan or druidic view about death is somewhat different from the Judeo-Christian view. This idea of like you're going to hell or you're going to heaven or you're going to this limbo place in the middle, where for people like uh, babies that are born and not baptized. Although I think the church has done away with that now. They used to have all these terrible graveyards in Ireland where unbaptized children were buried on unconsecrated ground, and that used to upset people enormously because they would be believing that their children would be sent to limbo for like to the end of time, to the final days of existence and the last judgment. So this poor little baby might be there for like 3,000 years waiting for something to happen before it can get off to heaven or whatever. I mean, what a crazy idea. I mean, we don't know, okay, unless you've had a near death experience and died and woken up again, you can't really say it's not something you come back from. When you die, you uh, you usually don't come back. Although there are people, druids included, who are able to communicate with the dead, and you can go into this of the other life if you like, where the Irish view particularly would be of three different realms of um, the land, which is the realm that we live in, which is sort of like everyday reality. And then you've got the other world, which is beyond the sea, which is where the dead live and spirits and the she and all that, the she being fairies basically, and all that sort of genre of beings. And then you've got the sky, the upper world, which is where the gods live and sort of angelic beings as well. But I mean, in the mythology, you also have sort of demonic forces as well as angelic forces. So this isn't exclusive to Christian idea about angels and demons. That's sort of more or less universal. You'll find that in Hindu and Shinto and Buddhist culture, etc. So the idea of sinfulness does exist in that that you should be morally upright and live a good life and not be a horrible person. But this kind of hell where you burn in eternity with there's Satan with the pitchforks digging into your flesh, and that doesn't really exist in the Druidic view. Uh, um, so yeah, it is quite different.
So, and that's one of the I picked up. First of all, I want to say your description of the cosmology of the Druid beliefs, of the Irish beliefs, is one of the most simplest ones I've ever read to understand. It is one of the most clear and decisive explanations. So, if you're looking for that explanation, it's in that book. And I love the cauldron. If the cauldrons aren't boiling and they're spilled out, you're dead. That was very simple and straight to the point. So that was good. So
See,
you
there's another question there that's quite interesting about the masks and Halloween.
yes.
Yeah, that's actually quite an old thing. You'd be surprised, actually. People tend to think of it as being as new because, you know, nowadays people tend to go run off to the shop and buy a plastic mask that was made in China, you know. Um, but the actual idea of it goes way, way back. You've got like these mummers plays You've got sort of processions of people where they would go through the streets in masks. Even today, there's events around that with the sort of horse figure, which is sort of a horse skeleton, if you like, which you get in Ireland. You also get that in Wales as well. And then a strange thing in Ireland in particular, that's transferred to Christmas, to St. Stephen's Day or Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, where they have like a mock battle between different teams, and they all wear these straw masks and straw hats, and you can't see anyone's face. And they have that horse character as well, and they also have a wren on a pole, which is a plastic wren, I'm pleased to say, these days, not a real one. But the idea of this mischief and hijinks and tricks and all that, people used to do things like they even do it now still, which is very annoying, turning road signs the wrong way round. So you come to a junction or like a crossroads, and it says say left for Killarney, and they've some idiot's gone and turned it the other way so it points right, just as a sort of Halloween prank. But along with this is like the disguises and the masks and such like. If you want to go out and do lots of pranks and trick people, it makes sense that you would have a mask, because you don't want everyone to know it's you. And then the next day, like, what did you do that for? And then you'd be in trouble then. So the mask thing goes back probably thousands of years,
To the mummers. Okay, author Susan Marcus. I was going to get into this topic on another show because it's a topic very close to Luke's heart. So maybe if we can just floor it, I'll let you know exactly when he's going. Luke, is that okay if we wait to discuss
you
this?
can see that on screen there, the climate change thing. Well,
Yeah.
that's a really difficult one, because my opinion about climate change has changed somewhat over time. I still think that environmentalism is incredibly important. But what's happened is that term climate change has become a sort of catch-all that's sort of been latched onto by corporations and this Green New Deal and all these big corporate things going on, climate change, this, that, the other. But I don't see any fundamental real change in the approach towards the environment at all. I think they just want to put carbon credits and costs onto people, and it generally hurts the poorest people the most, this approach. So there isn't any real evidence that the earth is getting like hotter and hotter. There is evidence that humanity is damaging the planet enormously, but not in the way that it's being suggested. I mean, I go back to sort of like Karen Carson's book, that's Silent Spring, and she wrote about how all the birds and insects and all kinds of wildlife and even children were being destroyed and killed even by pesticides, DDT in particular. And this whole, what they called the Green Revolution then, was like modern industrial farming. It was nothing green about it at all. It was actually the opposite of what you call green. So it's really important. I think Druids should stand up for environmentalism, but this kind of moniker of climate change, this whole thing, can almost be used to justify anything at all. Whereas actually in reality, I think what we need to do is stop using tons of pesticides and ruining the rivers, ruining the ocean, stop using so much plastic, and just cut down on all this endless consumerism, and try and protect all the species that are still alive now. So, getting rid of plastic straws is a good idea, but I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. People sort of focus on these little things when really the much bigger picture is that we can find a way to be truly sustainable. I think it's kind of been trendy, and all these corporates and politicians are all harping on about it. But when I actually look at what they're really doing, they're going to put the economy first. They're going to put consumerism first, and they just want to sort of find ways of sort of carrying on as normal, but trying to make themselves look green. I think it's got to start at the grassroots level with individuals changing their lives in terms of, being more selective about what you spend your money on. And, if you don't like what a company's doing, you think they're kind of wrecking the environment, don't buy their stuff, and tell your friends not to buy their stuff and your family. Um, we have the biggest power we actually have is in our pockets, in the money we spend. So if you, I think that's more important in a way than actual campaigning is what, being really choosy about what you do with your money, the way you spend it. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer, but
No, that's okay. We can talk more about that if you decide to come back and we're talking about the gardening and that. But I agree. I mean, as much as even in our home, they were peddling light bulbs that didn't use as much energy. And if you bought one, you would get a rug that said, I'm a good neighbor. Well, what was the point of using all the resources in that to make that rug so that I feel superior? I don't think so.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I
So
totally get that. It just seems like hypocrisy to a large extent, and this kind of feel good factor when is that really important? Actually, making a real difference is more
there's a
important.
lot of poverty
What
shaming
they call
in that
optics
idea.
now. A lot of it's all about optics, isn't it? It's got to look good. Doesn't really matter if it's actually making a difference as long as it looks good.
Aesthetics, yes.
Mhm.
Robin says, "What is the idea behind a pumpkin on your doorstep? Didn't they used to use gourds instead of pumpkins years ago?" No turnips.
Oh, I read your thing about the turnips. Yeah, it was turnips. Yeah. Oh my God, they are an awful pain.
Oh,
Pain in the
you
hole, the
cannot
turnips.
get through them.
Yeah, it's really, really hard. You need a really sharp knife and strong hands to carve a turnip into a pumpkin. So, I mean, it makes a lot more sense to use a pumpkin. But, I think you mentioned to me in your email about the food end of it. Somebody explained to me that I think it was my sister's married to a Canadian. She lives in Canada now, and we were talking about the whole thing. It's just, oh
About
well,
pies
those
being
those massive big pumpkins, they taste bad. They're not good. They're not tasty. So I actually tried to make a pumpkin pie with the inside of the pumpkin, and I cooked it, and it just was like a bit bland and nondescript and not very nice. And it's just, oh well, that's why you use this massive, huge thing, and they're rubbish. All you want is a little small pumpkin. They're the tasty ones. So I didn't know that. Nobody in Ireland knows that. So, how was I to know? So,
you are the first to know. Spread the word. No, we were discussing. Well, okay. So first of all, what is the reason behind even the turnip lanterns?
well, it's a safety thing, right? Because um, you imagine that you want to leave a candle. Back in the day, people either didn't have any windows or, the windows had no glass, wooden shutter. It's easy to knock a candle over. It's easy for a bit of curtain to catch into the curtain and catch fire. And there you go, your house is on fire. Bearing in mind, people used to have thatched houses back in the day. Everyone had a fireplace, but you would have to be careful. A lot of people had their livestock in the house for the winter too, and there'd be straw on the floor and things. You can imagine how quickly a fire could start in those circumstances. So
Yeah, no. So
it's very
it
much a
wasn't just for Halloween. They would make these turnip lanterns.
well, I think
Always.
specifically the lanterns at that time because you pick the turnips, in September, October, so they're all ready to use. But people would have, if they could afford it, they'd have candlesticks or proper nice lanterns. But I mean, if you could afford that, you're probably doing really well. You're quite well off. And you think a lot of cheap candles were made from what's called tallow, which is like fat from sheep and, well, mostly mutton, mutton fat. So it drips everywhere and it's smelly and it's, a fire hazard. So it makes sense really to put if you've got a whole bunch of turnips that you've grown, you just need one or two and you cut them out with great difficulty, I might add. And then you've got your nice safe lantern which you put in the window or at the door to invite your ancestors to come visit your house. That's the purpose of it. But I mean, in general, you have to be try and be careful with candles. You know how you see a lot of films and programs, and there's like a million candles, and they've got no safety stuff. They've got absolutely nothing to catch the fat or whatever. Or you've got all. It's completely nonsensical. No one would be that stupid. People were well aware that you could burn your house down, so they wouldn't have like 500 candles in one room. That just wouldn't happen. Apart from the crazy expense of having that many candles, it would have been a tremendous fire hazard, and you'd probably end up dead.
So the question I had asked Luke that was off
Yeah.
topic was that because he said the pumpkins came back to Europe when they didn't have the pumpkins for the scurvy, and he said, "What use do Europeans have for pumpkins except for jack-o'-lanterns?" And I said, "What about pie in general?" But I don't see. Are pies less popular?
No, people love pies. Apple
Okay, it's just
pies
the
are
pumpkin
super
pies.
popular.
They're not.
I think it's just like people don't know what to do with pumpkins. They don't know. Like they were saying, oh, you've got to take the right part of the flesh, not all of it's good. And like there you are, just merrily scooping it all out, and obviously you throw the seeds out, but it's like we're not familiar with
Yeah, so
what
it's
how,
yeah,
how to
that's
what to
cool.
do. So
It's
you
just
end
the
up with a
pumpkin
like
thing.
a horrid pie instead of a nice tasty pie. So after my first attempt, the pastry turned out good, but the actual inside was a bit rubbish, I'd have to say. So I just thought, oh no, I won't bother with this again. But one I probably used parts that I shouldn't have used, and I used a great big huge pumpkin, which was not tasty. Actually, I think it would have been my American friend Katie that told me about that as well. Oh no, you need to get the right kind of pumpkin. And it seems there's a whole thing about how to do properly. Like,
Yeah, no, my
it's
husband.
like here, making a rhubarb crumble or a rhubarb pie.
Yeah,
Oh,
no, you
people
have
will
to.
go on and on for hours about the right way to do that and this and that.
My
You
husband
know,
down at the bottom, I can smell the pie cooking. Okay, baking. He's making a pumpkin pie as we speak. I think
yeah,
because I mentioned it this week, and we do roast the seeds, so that's all
yeah.
part
Oh
of.
yeah, we see we're all like beginners here when it comes to pumpkin cuisine. We just don't know what we're doing. So it's just not a thing. People, every October you walk into a supermarket, you're going to see pumpkins, and people are buying them. And the rest of the year they're not there. Nobody buys pumpkins the rest of the year.
Well, I have to say they're pretty seasonal here as well
Yeah, but I
because
mean, no one buys them to cook with, hardly. I mean, maybe people who are American or Canadian or something, they might try and find pumpkins, but it's sort of like to cook with, but it's just not a thing. It's just, purely, it's just an easier version of a turnip, basically,
yeah.
you
Well, I mean that's a pretty big purpose because I still oh well those are kind of burnt. See, he
Yeah,
has
I
he
mean,
has
you can
pumpkin
make some,
seeds here.
oh, very good, yeah. I've seen like some amazing designs you can do with pumpkins, but I mean, the turnip is so hard. It's really difficult to carve any intricate shapes and stuff with those. It's just too
I
difficult.
you just
And
you just can't.
yeah, I mean, I stabbed myself accidentally before once
I
trying to,
believe it. I'm not laughing because you stabbed yourself, but I'm
well, I didn't do any
I'm
real terrible damage or anything, but yeah, it, it is so much easier, and I just say, well, never mind whether it's where it came from, it's a better alternative. And I mean, a lot of traditions do change over time. When there's a different better way to do something, people go, oh yeah, isn't that great? You think the wheelbarrow is, of course. I mean, think
yeah.
about that. People were hoofing things around, and then somebody, actually I think it was the Chinese, invented the wheelbarrow, and they go, geez, that's a really useful looking thing you got there. Where did you get that from? Oh, I just made it, some guy had said. And before you know it, half the world is using wheelbarrows to move
Everybody's
stuff
got one.
about because they're so useful.
Yeah,
So I
no,
mean, ooh, you've gone a bit. I seem to have lost you there. You've frozen.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh, I see a
Um,
question on screen from Robin again. Yeah, that would almost definitely come from Ireland. There's a huge population of Irish people, especially from counties Wexford and Waterford in the coastal area of Canada. I know that partly because a friend of mine went over to that area and was doing like storytelling. She's a Shanachie of storyteller. Um, so yeah, there's a really strong Irish heritage on the sort of northeastern American coast.
there's a lot of fairy stories, she stories coming out of there as well.
Well,
For the
people
same
bring their
reason.
stories wherever they go, and that's not just Irish people; that's everyone.
No,
So I mean,
exactly.
you're in New Orleans, I noticed. So I mean, I've actually been there, but I mean, you've got this sort of cross pollination of different cultures there. All this like African and French influence as well as sort of
And
American.
the merging of religions like the voodoo
Yeah,
with the Catholicism and as well.
yeah.
It
You're going to get that when you get a large population of any kind of people who migrate somewhere. It's going to have an effect on the culture. And you know, one of the great things I loved about America was all the food from all different parts of the world, which historically Ireland has like really rubbish food, like really awful, and like a bit very simple, not a lot of variation, and yeah, I just had such a great time going to the States, and actually I went to Canada earlier this year, and oh, I really loved all the food. You can get anything you want, and it's that's really great when you get this sort of merging of different cultures in that way. And food is one of the most interesting ways where you see that kind of melding together of different things. You know, I mean, look at the Creole cuisine. That's amazing. It's absolutely wonderful.
So I just did an author last week that wrote a book about New Orleans, and I swear it should have a disclaimer on it because the food in that book just had me like wanting to zoom out. It just so
Yeah,
yeah, I get that. It's really easy to do that. So all of these things like bobbing for apples and all of those things have some story that relates them to the past, right? There would be
yeah,
divination done with the
yeah.
apples
A
because they
lot of
would be
this
on him.
stuff's linked to divination, especially. Yeah. So it all seems weird and very much forgotten now. Like things like putting hazelnuts on the forest and watching them jump out as a form of divination, which is really quite bizarre. You've got to bear in mind, back in the day, you would have had this massive, huge fireplace, okay, which you've got a massive hole where the chimney is. So, I mean, God knows how much heat's going straight up out into the outside world, a lot, unfortunately. But then on the front of it, you'd have your sort of stone hearth. And you still see it today in a lot of houses where you've got this metal pole that goes across the chimney and you hang all your pots and what what have you off it. People used to make like griddle bread and things. You have like a flat iron, sort of like a sheet nearly. You can cook off of that and make flat bread and all kinds of things you can cook on it, and you as well as your pots, your cauldron, etc. But you know, you could sort of do things like put the nuts or whatever onto the front of the fire and watch them sort of slowly cook, and then sometimes they jump off. You know, and nuts actually you got to be careful; they can explode if you could put them in a fire. So people, that was one form, bizarre form of divination, which is obviously gone now. People don't do that anymore. Um, and the sort of the apple thing is very much linked with the other world. You'll find there's lots of Irish stories. Um, the I forget the actual Irish name for it. You know, they're like the land of apples, the realm of apples. Uh, you get mentions of Avalon in Britain. So it's very much linked with the other world and the spirits and fairies, the apple. And it's also very much linked with love as well. In fact, most of the divination you've got in the past is linked with money or love. Those are the two major things that people were interested in, with divination. Of
And
course, we still have divination now.
if you've ever done tarot readings, you know those are the only
No,
two
yeah,
questions people ever ask.
yeah. I know how to do tarot. I learned that a long time ago, but I don't really use it very often.
Yeah, no, I'm just
I
thinking those are the
It's
most
not really
important.
it's not really a druidic thing as such. I mean, it's actually comes from medieval Europe, from kind of just about pre-Renaissance Italy, I think, is where it started, and possibly in the south of France. So it's very, very kind of new as opposed to some of these divination techniques that were
Well, wait.
used by the ancient druids and stuff. But that doesn't mean it's no good. But nowadays you do get these decks and oracles, which is sort of a reinterpretation of tarot, basically, that are kind of more connected to nature or to druidism and such like. But the origins of it aren't actually that old.
No,
You're
no,
talking
no.
about 1400s, you know?
But do you, when you talk about the Ogham,
Yeah.
do you believe that that is simply a language, or do you believe that has divination
Oh yeah. Oh, it's much
abilities?
more than a language. If you Well, I mention it in two of my books, the Druid's Primer and the Druid Garden. The Druid Garden one is more to do with sort of uses and medicinal stuff, and actually how to grow these plants that you get the wood from, like the actual trees, how to cultivate them and look after them. But the other one, the Druid Primer, there I kind of discuss more all the different aspects of them, and as you say, it's being used in divination. It's sort of like I suppose, a sort of system of encoding knowledge, you could say, as well. I mean, it is definitely a language, but it's sort of there are so many associations within Ohm itself. Um, I should actually recommend a friend of mine. His book is probably the best book on just Ohm itself. I'm going to pull it out here. I've got it in the bookcase if I can get it out. It's kind of wedged in there. This is by an Irish guy called John Paul Patton. And there it is.
I'm
There,
writing that down. The
The
poets.
Poet's Ohm, a living magical tradition by John Paul Patton. Now, I would recommend. I use this book for my own research and referenced it myself in my own writing. I would strongly recommend, if you're really interested in Ohm, buy that book. You know.
Okay. Okay. I'm supposed to be selling your book. We're selling.
Yeah. Well, look,
I'll buy that book.
it's really a matter of trying to help people learn. I'm not here just to push
Yeah.
my
No,
own
no,
book,
no. I know. I'm
you know.
just. I have to. I just feel compelled to say these things. It comes out.
Yeah.
So Clacta is a mound, the mound or the hill that you feel close to. Do you have? Is there a set of standing stones that you feel drawn to, or?
Well, there's so many. There's lots of amazing places. Um, I suppose one that I particularly loved, uh, which going back to early question about human sacrifice, I think I felt that had actually occurred there. It's called the Piper Stones in County Wicklow. I'm pretty certain from my journeying there that what might have happened there a very, very long time ago, thousands of years ago, that people were, gave themselves up for you know to be killed at that site. But it's a very impressive. I mean, there's so many of them. There's amazing places to visit, not just stone circles, but some of the ancient monuments like Slieve na Carlion, or La Crue as its kind of modern name. That's really worth visiting if you can get there. Although it's a bit of a hike up a hill, so if you, it's not if you can't walk very well, or if you're in a wheelchair, then you're not going to be able to get up there. But if you're reasonably able, you can get there. More accessible ones would be like Newgrange, perhaps, because they have buses, and I think they do cater for people who have disabilities.
That's interesting.
That can be a problem for a lot of people. They want to go and see stuff, and like you get your wheel stuck in the mud and whatever. It becomes impossible sometimes for people to actually go and look at them. You'd nearly have to be carried in some cases on somebody's back or whatever to get into some of these sites, because not all of them are very accessible.
Well, see, and I think that's something that's hard for people on this side in North America to understand, is that there are so many of these places, these spiritual places, that like we don't have as much of things like that go back,
Well, I think
So,
you kind of do in a way. It's the
well, you
Native
do through
American
native,
stuff.
yes, but I'm not.
But a lot of that's kind of forgotten or buried. I don't know if you heard of Graham Hancock. I was watching a thing about his stuff called what's it? I can't remember the name of the series, Ancient something or other. But then in series one, he goes to this ancient mound, which is in a state like a serpent shape, which is First Nations people thing that's been there for thousands of years.
No,
Like,
there's a
but
lot
it
more
people,
things coming to light.
uh, yeah, I mean, I think every country has had these things, but they've often been forgotten. Whereas the Irish didn't forget them, and the British as well. I mean, we go to Japan, there's stone circles there, and in parts of Africa, there's really, really old stone circles in Africa. Uh, it's just that sometimes they kind of slip out of the consciousness, and people just forgot that they were even there. And of course, some of them do get destroyed by farming and building, etc.
That's no, when you're watching Time Team or something and they're like, okay, well, that's only 200 years old. We're looking for. You're like, no, because there is more.
I
So
see
this
there's
is
another question about the Romans and Druids. Yeah, there's actually a very interesting account called Gallic War by Julius Caesar. That book is all about his war against the Gauls and the Druids, because obviously they were a big army, but the sort of religious social structure was very much to do with the Druids, and as part of defeating the Gauls and then later the Britons, they prohibited Druidism altogether and sort of wiped it out. The Romans were kind of merciless, really. If you were like playing ball with them and you were willing to capitulate, then yeah, they probably let you keep your beliefs, let you do whatever you want, pretty much, as long as you play ball and give them the money they want and the trade and all the resources and the tribute. But then if you didn't, then it's like, right, okay, let's get rid of them all. And that's what happened in Gaul. That's what happened in Britain. And they didn't get very far into Scotland. They had a bit of a disaster in Scotland and got beaten back several times and built these walls to keep the Picts out, actually, because they were under threat. They didn't get anywhere in Ireland apart from a bit of trading. People speculate about whether they were going to invade Ireland, but I think they had enough trouble with England and Wales, and they had so much on their plate. I think Ireland was out of the question, to be honest. But they probably would have wiped out the Druids in Ireland if they'd had the chance, if they'd been able to get over here and invade. But that just wasn't going to happen, because already by the 4th century, they were really struggling. Britain as a Roman colony was already in big trouble.
And they also fought, I'm thinking of the earlier chapters in the book. They also fought they were invaded by the Saxons, right? They were invaded by the Vikings, I'll say, to make it short.
In Britain they were. I don't think the Saxons really had a whole lot
To
going on
do
in
with
Ireland. There would have been some clashes, and of course, Ireland actually in the ancient past invaded Britain. They invaded Wales, and they invaded like northern England, and they invaded
Oh, the
Scotland.
Normans. Was it the
No,
Normans?
no, no, the Irish before the
Yeah, no,
Normans
no.
arrived. Yeah,
But
the
I
Normans, of
thought
course,
there was
later
somebody
on.
else. I thought there
The
was somebody
Normans
else
and the
they.
Vikings came to Ireland, of course. Um, the Vikings first, and then later the Normans, and then after that the English in Ireland. But long, long before that, the Irish were actually invading Roman Britain, and so even before that, and after the Roman Britain, you had huge waves of Irish settlers, especially in Scotland. I mean, that's why the Scottish language is almost the same as Irish, because um, masses and masses of people from Ireland settled in Scotland. It changed the entire culture of Scotland. You know?
I think. Yeah, I think my family was backwards. Was that show called Ancient Apocalypse?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, that's my
In
husband. He watches.
series one, I think it was, where he goes to this place with this big, huge snake mound, and it's like astronomically aligned and everything. It was really quite impressive. I mean, I think there's been a lot of lies told about the Native Americans, that they were savages, but you've got all these, different types of agriculture and housing that they had, depending on what region of America they lived in. So this idea again that they were like the way the European pagans have been characterized as savages by the church, then the First Nations have been in North America and South America have been categorized as savages. The Incas certainly weren't savages. I mean, the Aztecs were very sophisticated, brutal but sophisticated, and the Mayans before them. So I mean, there's an awful lot of like this whole thing they say the victor gets to tell the story, they write the history. Well, that's very much true. So, you I mean, Julius Caesar did that. I was mentioned him earlier with the Druids in Gaul and Britain. Um, I don't think he's not going to make himself look bad in his own book, is he? So
No, no,
it's very biased, and history is generally quite biased when you
it's
read different accounts by. Yeah, I mean, I've read bits of what's his name, Christopher Columbus's book. I mean, he admits to these horrific crimes in that, but he seems to somehow justify what he did. Whereas from the point of view of the people who lived in Hispaniola, I'm sure if they ever had a chance to write a history or pass it on, they would have had a very different story to tell. Unfortunately, he wiped them out. He genocided them to the point that in 30 or 40 years they were gone completely down to the last man and woman.
if you
Um,
want to take over resources, you demonize the people by forming a religion that says that they're savages, and then you can justify to yourself your actions. This is pretty much what they did all over the place.
yeah.
And I'd say it starts with the Romans, but I get in trouble with that.
Well, I'd say it might have started sooner than that. I mean, I'm sure there's been other empires in the past that did similar stuff. Um, maybe the Romans were like the best at it. We really remember them because of their huge influence they had. But we don't really know when
No, it
the
went.
very first empire was, and what religions don't exist anymore that have been wiped out. I mean, there's still
It
12,000 plus religions in the world, even today. But there used to be a lot more. There used to be thousands and thousands of them. But
which brings me back to the question I want to ask: why do you want to organize another one by making
yeah.
this?
Well,
Just
there's organized and organized. I mean, I'm not looking for a hierarchy. I don't want like this sort of like economical. Is that the right word? Where you've got all this structure, where
yeah,
you've
yeah.
got like
You have a
a
top
pope
and then
and a
yeah.
cardinal, and then an archbishop and a bishop and a deacon, and then you've got like a regular curate. No, I'm not very much for that. I'm more in favor of circular structures as opposed to pyramid structures. Pyramids just disempower people. If you're at the bottom of the pyramid, you have a rotten time. And if you're at the top of the pyramid, you're like, yay, happy days. It's like constant holiday for you. And that's just so undemocratic, so unfair, and just rubbish. And I think humanity can dispense with the pyramid structure. It doesn't serve the purpose of humanity. It serves hardly a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of people. So that can go out the window as far as I'm concerned. And that's a load of old rubbish. But I do think you need to have some kind of structure and organization. Certainly, if you want to disseminate knowledge and pass knowledge down from one generation to the other and keep it going, you've got to have a certain level of organization.
Okay, well, we'll think about this. Would you like to come back and talk about it and the gardening at another time?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that would be very interesting. So I have a tendency to go off on tangents a bit, as you've probably noticed, but little things trigger certain ideas and
No,
thoughts,
that's what Fika
as
is
we
all
go,
about. This is why I spent 3 days writing a guideline that we didn't pay attention to once. But the
Well, we did
ideas
cover quite a lot of your list.
Yeah, no. The ideas are
Yeah,
there, and we won't, go.
yeah. Well,
But I
it's
won't
been
make that
really good.
mistake
I can
again.
see we must be running out of time now, but it's been great fun. I've enjoyed myself.
It has.
Yeah.
So we'll work on another day, and thank you very much. I'm just gonna go, guys. I'm shutting down the
Oh, I
comments.
see you
So
have a pumpkin behind you. I can see it behind your head
I
there.
do. I did that just for
Yeah.
just for a little
Yeah. Is
ambiance
that
while
is
we
that
were.
is that too big for cooking with, or
That
would that
is
be?
that's like a medium-sized pumpkin. So that would be too big to cook with. The
Yeah.
cooking ones are like just about this big. I would show you one, but they got
Yeah.
already baked into pies.
I would like to actually try some proper pumpkin pie and see what it actually should taste like. But the trouble is, you can't really buy it here. So, I suppose it wouldn't travel well if you send it by Federal
Yeah,
Express.
no,
It
it
might
would
be
get
a
very
bit.
messy. I would think it's custardy without a top crust. So I'm not sure how to
Yeah.
do that.
Maybe I need to find someone from North America who can make me a proper, genuine, sort of a real pumpkin pie, and so I
Oh,
can get to taste it and see what it's actually really like, instead of my pathetic effort that I.
no,
I
it's
made.
not your fault if the bigger pumpkins have less flavor and they're more watery, right? So you're not getting, and you have to cooking the pumpkin. You just put it in like a little bit of water and at in the oven and let it bake, and then you can just scoop it out so you don't have to peel it out of the peelings, and it's not waterlogged. It is the process.
I think I'll stick to my apple and rhubarb crumble, or blackberry and apple
Well,
crumbles,
that's
because
very
I can
good.
do that well. I know how to do that without
That's
making a real mess of it, or
we'll have
haze of
to
it, as they say.
we'll have to do a show of like all this baking and then present it to people they can view if they can't taste. That's
Yeah.
the thing. So I'm just going to say goodbye to you and then tell my guests what's happening next week. And if you want to stick around after the music, you can. If you have other places to go, we'll pick up a date another time. Okay.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And you obviously drew a crowd. So that's good.
That's great.
Bye-bye,
Thanks a
Luke. Okay. Next week on Fika, we are having Thea Prothero is going to be joining us. She's just launching a guide to pilgrimage, so we'll be looking into that. That's exciting. And also, I found out she tells ghost stories, which is why she's coming tomorrow, so she can read some of her ghost stories to us. Since it will be Halloween next week. Remember, if you want to know what's coming up, follow Fika with Vicky on Facebook. And until then, may your coffee be hot and your story sweet. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Well,